Welcome, travelers. Let's step straight into the gallery for a dark explainer of our theatrical demise. Today, we're unraveling the fragile peace that settled right after the smoke of the Hundred Years' War cleared. Look, what we are diving into is a deeply rich, highly cautionary folktale, really designed for an adult audience. It's a story all about corruption, absolute power, and the terrifying, world-ending consequences of inviting raw chaos into strictly structured spaces. Our central figure here is the uncanny Jester. This mysterious, chaotic entity arrived in the kingdom of Londoria not to tell a few jokes and entertain, but to literally tear the very fabric of its reality to shreds.
Just let those words snap in your mind for a second, like dry silk. The stage is not a cage for the shadow. It is the trapdoor. That is absolutely crucial. It's the entire thesis of the Jester's plot to dismantle Londaria from the inside out. See, the ruling class actually believed that art, theater, and the unpredictable, messy nature of the streets could be neatly contained within the wooden walls of a playhouse. They thought the stage was a cage. But the Jester knew that performance is porous. It's not a cage at all, it's a trapdoor, perfectly positioned to let the darkest elements of human nature slip right into the real world.
So here's our playbill of the doomed for today. We'll be witnessing the tragic descent of the vessels across 6 parts. 1. The Jester's metaphysical rupture. 2. The Knight's rotted armor. 3. The Scholar's black ash. 4. The King's distorted shadow. 5. The final trapdoor. And lastly, 6. The Great Clock of Souls.
Starting off with part 1, the Jester's metaphysical rupture. Because before you can dismantle a throne, you have to create a wound in the world.
Okay, so what exactly is a metaphysical rupture? Well, the source text describes it as a catastrophic bridging of the gap between the rigid, controlled light of the crown and the messy, episodic reality of the streets. Following the war, Londaria was completely obsessed with order. Everything had to be categorized, strictly policed, and locked down. But the Jester? He thrives in the messy, chaotic reality of the common folk. And to bridge this massive gap, he didn't just want an audience to sit back and watch. No, he demanded flesh and bone to actually carry this rupture into the highest echelons of society. And so the search began for his 3 hosts. These were the exact vessels chosen to bear the agonizing literal weight of his uncanny truths. And the dark genius of the Jester's strategy is that he didn't just possess a few weak-minded peasants, he went right for the jugular. He targeted the absolute pillars of Londrian society, vessels representing law, art, and governance. But spoiler alert, none of them were remotely strong enough to contain the darkness they invited in. Which brings us to part 2, the Knight's rotted armor. For his first act, the Jester sets his sights on the cold enforcer of the realm, representing the catastrophic failure of law. The Knight, known as the Master of Revels, was supposed to be this impenetrable shield, enforcing rigid law and order to bind unruly spirits through strict vagrancy acts at the playhouses. But when the Jester's chaos poured in, that rigid duty was entirely subverted. The law became a chaotic sieve. And what's absolutely wild to me here is how the kingdom's physical rot is represented directly in the Knight's armor. It didn't just symbolically rust. The lore specifically tells us it grew heavy with the scent of 1,000 fly wings. Just a visceral, disgusting manifestation of the decay happening deep within the bone of Londaria's justice system. The Knight couldn't contain the chaos, so his very defense mechanism became a decaying cage.
Moving right along to part 3, the Scholar's black ash.
Physical rot is one thing, right? But next, the Jester needed a voice to really spread his infection. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a voice. It was a highly sophisticated mask. He inhabited the Scholar, a figure explicitly linked to the real-world playwright Christopher Marlowe and the university wits. The Scholar offered a silver tongue of beautiful, refined blank verse. This tricked the ruling class into accepting the chaos because, well, it sounded so educated and artistic. But the Scholar ultimately failed as a vessel because his fiery ambition was just too great. When the Jester's debt finally came due, the Scholar's magnificent, overreaching poetry literally choked on black ash, leaving his spirit to burn in what the text calls the violet frost. So art couldn't domesticate the madness either. Now we're at part 4, the King's distorted shadow.
With the law rotted out and art totally corrupted, we ascend to the absolute peak of the hierarchy, governance. We arrive at the throne itself. The crucial point you have to understand is that the king spent his entire reign running from his own shadow. He was completely obsessed with order, desperate to banish any trace of unpredictability.
But the Jester's influence is pure, unadulterated chaos. By targeting the king, the Jester forced the monarch to gaze directly upon the theater, this rowdy, messy, unpredictable reality where beggars and noblemen stood side by side. The Jester effectively weaponized the theater. It was no longer a cage to contain discord. It became a purging vessel that shoved the kingdom's darkest impulses right into the king's face. Let's look at the actual mechanics of this grand tragedy, because it's like a dark puzzle coming together. The Jester used very specific invocations to break his hosts. For the scholar, he used the truth-telling monster rune, which forced him to arrogantly challenge the stars and divine rights, directly leading to his fiery demise. And for the king, the Jester invoked the rune of the Holy Fool. This specific magic struck directly at the king's controlled light, exposing the absolute folly of his crown and leaving him as nothing more than a hollow shell. The vessels were fundamentally broken by the very truths they spent their lives trying to suppress. And that brings us to part 5, the final trapdoor. This is it. This is how the tension builds to the terrifying climax of our folktale, where the performance ceases to be just a performance. This is the ultimate symbolic shift from stage play directly into reality, an event called the tearing of the veil. Step 1. The Jester invokes the runes of creation. Step 2. He completely dismantles the fourth wall. At this point, the audience isn't safe, the kingdom isn't safe, the play is bleeding right into reality. And finally, Step 3. By tearing that veil, he paves the way for a much, much darker entity, the Obsidian Doctor, to step right through the artifice of the stage and directly into the physical realm of governance. The Jester, as it turns out, was merely the opening act. Through the invocation of the rune of distorted reflection, the physical boundaries literally collapse. Theater and throne room, boom, merged into a single space. The king, completely stripped of his rigid order, realizes way too late that his untamed shadow had found him completely vulnerable. The Jester's chaos had eroded him so thoroughly from the inside out that he simply became a king weak enough to wear. His shadow was never banished at all. It just waited patiently for the king to become a suitable, hollowed-out garment. Which leads us to our final act, Part 6, the Great Clock of Souls. So the heartbeat of the audience suddenly becomes a terrifying countdown. When the Obsidian Doctor finally arrives, he finds the kingdom already undone by its own image. Stripped of the artifice of the stage, the kingdom is horrifically rebranded as the Great Clock of Hollowed Souls. And this is the most chilling part. The citizens of Londaria are now trapped, and every single heartbeat they have counts toward an inevitable debt. The great clock is chiming, not for a play, but for that debt. The Doctor begins the Great Silence, a complete eradication of the realm's vibrancy. And who is left standing at the end of it all? Only an upstart playwright named Shakespeare, left completely alone among the ashes of the crown, bearing witness to the hollow shell that Londaria has become. It leaves us with a genuinely haunting paradox to consider. As you wrap up this explainer today, just listen to that dual decree echoing in your head. The final chime of the Jester's bell harmonizing perfectly with the Obsidian Doctor's bone staff striking the earth. The old world is gone. And you really have to ask yourself, was the Jester's chaotic madness actually the harsh cure needed for Londaria's suffocating arrogance and rigid order? Or is this eternal hollow silence brought by the Doctor the ultimate cosmic punchline? Thank you for exploring this dark stage with us, and whatever you do, keep questioning the shadows in your own kingdom.